This episode of The Pride Transformation is a continuation of my blockchain series, where I sit down with folks who are working on interesting blockchain and cryptocurrency projects to try to figure out what the future holds for this wonderful technology and how it's going to affect humanity. Today I sit down with Marcus Weller, who has a PhD in industrial psychology. He's currently the CMO at iTrust Capital, so we'll hear about what iTrust Capital does. And he's the head of science at a company called Halcyon Biotechnologies. So he's been working in biotech a little while. So we talk at length about a lot of things in this conversation. We talk about tribalism and crypto. It's really great to hear some insight from somebody who has, I guess could put a psychology hat on and try to think about, why tribalism exists in crypto. We talk about artificial intelligence. We talk about, what consolidation could look like in this space. And we ask one big question, which is, can the world truly be decentralized? So this is a great conversation. Marcus is great. I hope you guys like this. Let's get started. Welcome to the Prior Transformation Podcast. I'm your host, Jimmy Smoots. In this podcast, we explore, there's no we, it's just I'm the only person here. And really, I just ramble for 2 or 3 minutes on a technology or business topic. And occasionally, I'll interview some smart folks. If you like that kind of thing, enjoy. Welcome back. I'm here with Marcus Weller. Marcus, thanks for joining us today.
It is a pleasure to be here, Jimmy.
Oh man, so you're in Florida now.
That's right.
I think we met in the Virgin Islands.
That's right.
Which was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's quite a place to meet someone.
Yeah, that was a crazy trip, honestly. People, I guess you have to listen to a different podcast to get that story.
Yes.
So what are you up to now? What are you working on?
So I've been running product at Halcyon Biotechnologies, which is basically doing like cognitive therapeutics, nootropics, and products around mental health for entrepreneurs and young professionals. And it's mental health from a positive psychology perspective. So as you know, my PhD is in psychology, and I'm very passionate about sort of the mental side of the game for, young hustlers and entrepreneurs and, people of all stripes. And so, that was just an area that I felt we could really make an impact. So, one of my partners in that business, Jay Kranzler, he's a former psychiatrist at Pfizer. And so he was a VP there doing cognitive therapeutics. And we saw that there was just a lot of opportunity to, bring things to market, products to market that, had pharmaceutical-like, efficacy, but with less, downsides, less negative side effects. So like one of the things that we did that was kind of innovative was that we used a newer compound called theacrine, which is chemically structurally it's similar to caffeine, but it's one step further in sort of the synthesis process as the plant creates it, and so it becomes more methylated. And then what that means is it's stronger and lasts longer in your system, right? And it doesn't develop a tolerance. And then we use this thing where we would actually do pharmacokinetic profile matching. So we would slow down its rate of absorption in the body by coating it in hydroxymethyl propylcellulose, and that would basically allow it to release in different places in your digestive tract. So you get this like extended release effect. That was what I was looking for in sort of a nootropic as a young entrepreneur, like popping modafinil like coffee, trying to keep up in long weeks, as we all know. So I've been working on that for a while on the product side. And a new thing that I'm working on, which I'm really excited about, is working with iTrust Capital on the marketing side. And so what that's doing is solving this really high friction issue with getting exposure in your IRA to crypto. I've done it for myself and for my family, setting up self-directed checkbook, Roth IRAs, where you can, put some crypto holdings in there, and then on top of that, be able to have some malleability and be able to trade it around, and then kind of protect it a little bit from capital gains taxes because it's under a Roth structure. So it's a no-brainer if you want to have maybe 10 or 5% of your IRA to have some crypto exposure. But the problem was it was 37 painful, brutal steps to get it set up, and probably 12 weeks of rigmarole. So what iTrust was doing, I got introduced by a brilliant, crypto, engineer, T-shaped executive guy, Zach Kelling, told me about this company, and they were basically solving it in a matter of hours. They were getting you all set up and done. And I was like, you've got to be kidding me. That would have solved my problem. So that's a new sort of thing that I've become involved with that I'm really excited about as well.
So it's like a Fidelity or something like that for crypto.
It's a Fidelity for crypto, but if you could imagine, the painfulness of getting your Fidelity IRA set up or 401k, and most people don't even ever log in after it's set up. They're like, okay, good, I got my employee contribution. Okay, I'm done.
Yeah, it just goes. Yeah.
And this just makes it. It's the front end, but it's also the back end, and making all of that simplified, but also doing it in a very judicious way that makes sense, where you're not, you're not overextending yourself. It's just, it makes sense. You want some exposure to this asset class, and you want to have obviously a range of, things, but I think certainly for somebody between ages of 30 and 50, you've got some time to kind of explore and experiment. And this is the obvious choice.
How'd you get into crypto?
Well, crypto is funny. I knew some of the guys at Bitfury back in the day when they were kind of starting out, and they were raving about it. And I thought, wow, this is kind of interesting. I think this was maybe 2013, 2014. And so I started looking more closely at maybe accepting it as payment at one of my last companies. And so I pitched this to the board.
I said, you told me about this.
Yeah, I said, why don't we just consider writing down, $500,000 in pre-orders, and we just set that aside. I think we'd raised about $11 million at that point. So I said, let's just raise $500,000. We'll set that aside, pretend that money doesn't exist, write it down as a loss, right? And then let's just see, and let's just ride it. And so that was vetoed, unfortunately, but that would have subsumed the entire company's valuation if we would have just ridden that out. I think it was, from my viewpoint, I felt like it was going to be a radically transformative technology. It reminded me a lot of something I was passionate about in high school, which was just distributed computing, with the World Community Grid that was helping cosmologists, and then also the way that we use distributed computing in a way to solve the human genome, to crack the human genome essentially and map the entire human genome. Those were areas where I first noticed that if you could basically fragment the work and then recombine it in an algorithmic way, that's incredibly powerful. You don't just accomplish 10 times more. It's many, many orders of magnitude more that you can accomplish, and there's no task that's too complex for that approach to computing. And so when there was an economic system that was overlaid on top of distributed computing, that was like, okay, that solves the reason why nobody is downloading the World Community Grid when I'm raving about it at cocktail parties. It's like not really a hot topic of conversation, but if you say, hey, by the way, you could get rich on it too, and help scientists by letting them use some of your computing power to scan the skies. Imagine you could get rich on it too. That's what's going to get people to jump on board, and that's what I was so excited about with respect to crypto, and especially as we started to narrow in on specific use cases in the real world.
So that there's a lot there. One of the things I'd love to kind of peel back would be just the notion that. I'm saying this in air quotes, you can get rich, right? Because you can.
Right. Putatively.
Or I guess you could. My skepticism, which, I kind of vacillate between being skeptical and not, is that last year you can get rich, but in the future, the question is, can you continue to get rich, right? So my question is what is the reason that people will adopt crypto in the future? If everybody has a friend who made a shit ton of money in crypto. So what's the reason moving forward that people will, adopt this tech?
I think this is quintessentially a marketing question, all right? And the reason why I say that is because when you buy a product, you're not buying it because you want it or you need it. You're buying it, you're hiring it to do a job for you, right? That's the only reason we buy products, is we're hiring that product to do a job for us. Even if it's ice cream, we're hiring that ice cream to make us feel better or to cool us down. We have a problem and we want to hire a product or a person or a service or software to solve it for us. So I think that people will adopt crypto. I mean, that's such a broad term. Maybe it's not even going to be called crypto, and it'll be called the actual solution that it is, when we get to that point. But when crypto can start solving things for us and, doing the jobs for us that we need done, I think that's where we'll start to get that, that accelerating curve. But right now, the utilization rates are so appallingly low for almost any offering in the space that if that was part of your due diligence for investing, you just would never invest. I mean, one of my best performing coins through the downswing was BNB, and my whole thesis was the utilization rate is head and shoulders above everything else. So if part of my thesis was the stuff I am going to stay in and not pull out of are going to be the things that are constantly used. And so even with the trade volumes plummeting, you're still seeing, BNB retain some of its value. Why is that? It's because it's doing a job for these people. It helps them defray their trading expenses, and it in and of itself helps them sort of retain some of the value that's plummeting across all of the other coins. So I don't know if that really completely answers the question. I mean, I guess the shorter version is I have no clue.
I do kind of think it is a marketing problem. I mean, one of the reasons why I really wanted you on the podcast is I think you are probably one of the best marketing minds that I've run into, just generally across the board. The brand for Scully was phenomenal. The branding was just like on point for that. Everything you've done for the Halcyon project, like that kind of stuff that you're working on, like the marketing is just like, it's like watching a masterclass, first of all. So a little plug for you there. But do you think, I have like a thesis that a lot of crypto has like a brand identity problem. And there's a fundamental, it's kind of good to have a distributed network of consensus and all these different things. But the problem is you get this diffused message and it's really kind of hard to collapse that down. I mean, what do you think about that?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is that some of this infighting with BTC and BCH is like, we just look like chumps to the world. Yeah. I mean, when we're choosing sides and trying to like isolate market share and create camps and cults, this doesn't serve us. This doesn't advance the community. We're being chumps. Like, this reminds me of like different gangs in LA. Like we need to get real and we need to collaborate. There's just, the market will self-fragment in the future. And it will also go through consolidation phases. There'll be big bangs and big crunches over and over again, but we're not mature enough to be fragmented right now. There are unsolved problems in crypto that require a great deal of collaboration across cults. And so that's what I'm hoping that we see is some maturation around how do we interoperate. We need interoperable solutions. We need an umbrella approach that, maybe there are specific use cases that for the user, that's all seamless. But and I think we're starting to see some of the stuff with like stable coins, like starting to sort of approach, like, how do we retain the utilitarian value and not hyperinflate or deflate the utilitarian value of a particular coin by stabilizing some of the underlying, value or whatever. And I think that is really key. Arca is an example of a company that's, working on solving that piece of the puzzle. And so I think that those are things that I'm kind of looking for right now. And I'm hoping that we get to a place where I'm comfortable using it as a consumer, because let's be honest, a lot of the people that are operating in this space, they may not even be using crypto on a regular basis as a consumer. And I'm stating that very lightly. I mean, I know for a fact that there are very few people using crypto as a consumer. I mean,
I think I'm a crypto power user, and I've used it maybe 1%, less than 1% of my transactions. I have friends that all send crypto almost like as a gimmick.
Yeah, you literally do it.
Yeah.
You've done it to me. Like, it's almost like you're forcing it on me. Like, and I appreciate it, because it's like, let's do this. Let's use this more. But there's a reason. Why do you think that we don't?
I know it's hard, man. I think there's a big usability issue. I think, a base 58 public key, as an address to send to is a big problem and an obstacle to overcome for the average person. I always liken, the crypto world to like ham radio, where it's this, really cool thing, super powerful, but it requires some technical knowledge. It's almost like you have to have a special amount of training to even interact with the blockchain directly. You can kind of interact through Coinbase or something or Binance or whatever, but if you want to interact directly with it, it's not very easy. So I think there's some rough edges we need to sand off of our usability. I mean, this is a project. This is the project that I was working on last year. I think we talked about trying to make an ultra usable consumer grade wallet. I determined that ultimately are consumers going to adopt the wallet? Mm-hmm. It's questionable at this point. I think maybe in a couple of years, but not last year. I think it was a lot of speculation. So, I don't know. I don't really know the answer to that question. That's so. What are your thoughts?
I mean, what I can tell you what I'd like to see. I can't speak to the viability of developing it in this way. I mean, I have friends, really smart ones that like yourself, that are probably better suited to answer this question. But what I will say is, as a consumer, I would like stuff to just be automatically integrated into like the top 5 apps that I, do commerce on through my phone, and that it's already embedded in there as a payment option, as if you were adding the Apple Pay button or the Amazon Pay button, and that you have a way to stabilize the value that I'm, buying. I'm hiring that thing, whatever that app is, to solve a job for me, and I don't want the wage I pay for that service to radically fluctuate, or I can't rely on that service provider. So just some stabilization around how we achieve, mobile commerce, the value that you're, ascribing to and exchanging for mobile commerce. If you can stabilize that and have seamless integration, don't reinvent the wheel. If it doesn't require a brand new app, but the back end is on the blockchain, fine. Why would we totally reinvent every complete part of the stack in the value chain? You don't have to do that. Like, I think you just have to nail the parts that are causing the most friction and pain. I mean, I think we would all use it if there was just a way to stabilize the value regardless of what's going on in the crypto markets, and we were able to deploy that in the Uber app. People would just, the utilization rates would skyrocket. Like, if just one company would just solve that and we were to just do that, that'd be the most used crypto on earth, probably within weeks.
Uber.
So I know I'm way oversimplifying that, and that's why the caveat is, like, as a consumer, that's what consumers need to see. Not everyone's a blockchain developer. Not everyone is even fluent in blockchain speak. You know.
Yeah.
So I think that we have to find a way to take the friction out, take the scariness out, and stabilize the value for the things that we're paying.
Okay, and then you mentioned some tribalism a little earlier. And coming from the psychologist PhD, would love to kind of hear your thoughts on why people, I don't know if this is a current trend or just a human trait, tend to kind of force themselves into these tribes, and then what's the underlying concept or urge behind that?
What's the deal with tribes? I mean, it's just not a good look. I can't really say. I think that early on, in the formative stages of a culture, in a company or in a country or in a financial movement or at Enron or whatever, the culture, it forms and it starts to crystallize early, and there are like emergent characteristics of it. And, and it happens kind of like this. You attract certain people to it based on the values that you are espousing or whatever, right? And then of those people that are attracted to it, then you select people that are most like yourself, right? And then you go through a phase of attrition where you get rid of people that don't conform as closely to the values as you wanted. So this ASA model, or, attraction, selection, attrition, that that phase of culture formation has happened in crypto. And I think it happened early on where, you had people that coalesced around certain values, and then they go out and they become parts of all these other companies. And then there are parts of all these companies where like tribalism or in-group, out-group stuff is just the way of doing business in crypto. And I think that's really unfortunate. It's not like the scientific community. For another example is the scientific community. If you're like a researcher, you're a PhD in a lab doing research, they have literally the opposite culture, and they're solving just as gnarly of problems, if not worse, harder problems, curing cancer. Like they're doing things that it's cracking the human genome. I mean, this stuff is probably there are very few things that are more transformative to society than, the emergence of blockchain, right? But I would say genetic engineering and immunology and how that relates to genetic engineering is potentially more transformative. I mean, so if they can do it, we could do it, right? But their culture is just radically different around collaboration. They don't have warring factions. They're all like operating towards this greater good, and it's not just lip service at a conference.
Mm-hmm. Do you think it's like just you think it's a populism thing that's like spilling over to tech? It's like the tech version of like a populist. I mean,
I find that analogy really interesting that you bring that up. I think you have to look at like temporally which came first. I don't know. I mean, well, clearly populism has been an issue throughout history. I mean, we can say that. But I mean, just locally in this context, I think it feels to me like the populism factor wasn't as much of a factor until maybe until crypto really started spiking. I mean, I would say populism wasn't really like the main topic of conversation. Somebody could probably check me on this on Google Trends, but I mean, I would say probably populism didn't really become part of the, dinner table lexicon until September of last year.
Yeah. I kind of liken it to a bunch of craps tables, and everybody's just talking about how their craps table is the best, right?
Right.
Because everybody's winning, and literally last year felt like a collab, like everybody was standing around a craps table. It was just a constant cheering, roaring, thing until 7 rolled in January, and then it was all over. But yeah, it's kind of interesting. I wonder if there's something inherent about crypto, or just I wonder if crypto is basically like a reflection of us, right? Mm-hmm. And if the reflection is, unfortunately flawed because we are flawed, right? Is that the concept? Is there an issue there because, people innately, kind of segment into these tribes? So is that something that crypto always will be, or will we actually be able to create a larger, network and those kind of things? I'm just curious if that's even possible.
It is possible, but I don't know if we'll do it. I just don't think that right now, the reason why I think it's possible, in my opinion, is because there's a common culture even across the factions. It's almost like this artificial, let's say you have 2 crypto companies, and they actually have a lot of the same values, but they talk shit about each other. That's an artificial dichotomy. They really probably would be better served to merge and just join forces and, kick ass together. And so I do think that hopefully, well, here's the thing. This is what often happens is PE serves that role to consolidate a market, right? They'll say, oh, here's a bunch of similar players. You know what? We're going to just put you guys all into a box and shake it up, and that's going to be the new company, and then eliminate the redundancies and move forward. And they're just like we were talking about how things will fragment themselves in the market, that we're sort of hyper fragmented artificially right now. There'll be a phase of consolidation and then a natural phase of fragmentation again. But I think that if you have some consolidation that's economically driven, then maybe there's an opportunity to coalesce around those common values of culture. Because the main reason why an acquisition fails is actually a conflict of cultural values. In the case of crypto, I mean, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this too, but I mean, my feeling is from many of the many crypto companies that I've advised and talked to and learned from, is they're more similar than they are different.
Yep. No, it's true. I mean, there are, I guess, nuanced differences. It's like anything. It's like any human factions, for the most part, all the same ideas generally, with nuanced differences that are exacerbated by somebody in power for questionable reasons. What are the reasons? I mean, that'd be another question I'd have is like, why do you think, you know, why do you think these factions exist? Like, what's the purpose behind them if they are so similar, right? Is it monetarily? You know, is it just the people in power are manipulating the market and they know they can do it and then they're persuasive, or what is it? Is something about humans? Is it like what's the thing that's driving this? I'd love to kind of
if you look at like the playbook of corporate raiders and like the big PE firms,
yeah.
like, you know, you don't gain power by having a totally fragmented market. You gain power by puppet mastering, you know, 10 different companies and combining them into one, and, you know, eliminating all the redundancies, taking the efficiency out, and like recapitalizing the company and taking half of the cap table, like, or more, you know. And so I think that, you know, from the perspective of why there are so many like little fragments of companies, that, like, how did that emerge? Why is it like such a, you know, why are there just so many different companies doing the same shit?
Yeah.
I think that is more about the isolation of an entrepreneur. You have a good idea and you maybe have access to a couple of engineers, or you're an engineer yourself, and you just don't have the network yet, and you can't like really form a big company that's well thought through. And so you go through the struggles and the machinations of figuring out what your team is and what your culture is, and firing people or not firing people, and letting your company crash and burn because of that one person you refused to fire when you needed to, and all that kind of stuff. And so I think that's why you get that. Like, if you, as a market matures and all those people's, you know, networks get better, and you also get better at like picking talent, and you have access to better talent and stuff like that, then you start to get larger companies and less fragmented solutions. And, you know, then you start having big incumbents. And also another part is what you mentioned early on, is there is a brand issue with crypto, and it's preventing some of the best minds in the world from getting involved. Now, don't get me wrong, there's some brilliant, amazing people in crypto, but there are a lot of players at like Oracle and, you know, other places that are not in crypto because they would never put their name on something crypto. But obviously, you know, when things start to mature and consolidate, those are going to be the CEOs of these companies.
Yeah. So what do you think consolidation looks like, right? In a world where you have a bunch of different blockchains or a bunch of different tokens, right? You know, what's interesting about the blockchain is there's this concept of forking, but I mean, have we seen a merge? I don't know if we've seen chains merge yet. Have we seen chains merge? I mean,
it's seldom enough to where I couldn't give you an example off the top of my head. I'm sure it is happening. I'm just saying that, what does consolidation look like?
There's no PE, right? I mean, is PE going to come in and just start buying?
I think literally actual PE firms are going to say, okay, it's time to get our exposure and dominate crypto now. Like, I do think that literally is going to happen. It's not going to be a crypto PE. It's, you know,
yeah.
They may have a crypto angle, but they're going to have enough capital to basically just completely consolidate. They'll figure out who the best players are. They'll start out like in an intelligence gathering phase where they send out, you know, operatives into the field, and they're meeting and advising all these different companies. They figure out who's who, what's what, who knows what they're talking about versus just yammering on. And then they'll eventually, I think, you know, get a lay of the land, do some corporate business development, and put these companies together. Now, what you're saying is it even technologically feasible given like these different forks and different chains and so forth? And I think that is a maddening issue. We're starting to create enough like space junk right now, like just floating out there in the ether of just crap that's going to be really difficult to solve in the future, you know, like by fragmenting, you know, and all these different forks and all this stuff. Listen, that is a very confusing thing for people. Like, do you think forking helps adoption? Like, we care about adoption, right?
Yeah.
I mean, people have fork fatigue.
Yeah. It's a brand. It just fragments the brand more, right? That's the unfortunate. Yeah, forking creates now what was a consolidated strong brand. It just weakens the brand in whatever.
Yeah, and then like, okay, now you have to choose a side. You have to choose a camp.
And you have to really, it's your Bitcoin Cash or your Bitcoin Core. Yep. I mean, which one are you? Like,
and that's the classic one. It's like, you guys, you could take over the world if you would just get your shit together and find a way to collaborate or come up with a third solution that those are the people at the top, arguably. Those are supposedly the mega influencers. What is an influencer? Well, they're tastemakers that essentially inculcate people to cultural values in a community. So when the top, tastemakers in a community are like, fragment, talk shit, let's separate, let's constantly fork, let's constantly, debate. I get there's reasons on both sides for doing that, for sure, but it doesn't serve the community. And I don't want to be negative on it because I'm super long and super bullish and all that. But right now, I think that utilization doesn't lie. A lot of this is just theoretical, but if people are using something, which is so seldom and so rare right now, that's where I'm kind of like putting my chips.
So what do you think the future holds for this industry? What's the Marcus vision of blockchain?
I'd like to just see a few like really solid incumbents become very well capitalized. And there's, $2 quadrillion of capital waiting on the sidelines in the form of derivatives on down to people's IRA accounts and everything. And that money is very eager to have some exposure. And I think there are some companies that, would be well served to have some of these larger funds, partner up with them. And that's why I think iTrust is so valuable. The founding CEO, Morgan, he basically created the original methods for getting IRA exposure with crypto. So, and I think that's just an incredibly powerful thing. So, not to like overly plug that, but that's something I believe in, is just changing sort of the audience who's investing. Not that it's not like these early adopter weirdos, like us, but that it's mom and pop and the 30-year-old young professional that's just starting out, or the 45-year-old that wants to port over some of their IRA. I think that those are kind of like interesting plays. So it's right now we need boring stuff that works. Like boring is really sexy to me right now.
Do you think I'm trying to figure out the best way to ask this question. Do you think the concept of the organization, like the way organizations are currently structured, because your PhD is what, organizational psychology, something
industrial organizational psychology? Yep.
First of all, what is that? Because I don't think a lot of people know. So what do you say?
So it's psychology applied to business, and okay. So what it's looking at is what are like certain consumer behaviors that lead to purchasing decisions or investing decisions. It looks at performance, like how do people perform, and what are the sort of the antecedents to like good cognitive performance in the workplace or at your job or as a trader or whatever it is. And it also looks even at ergonomics and human factors of like user experience and user interface design. It's very, very data heavy. My minor for my PhD was in data science, and that's a very key underpinning of what we do. It's not, some people, maybe they hear psychology and they don't think it's necessarily a hard science, but it's really more than anything, it's like a math degree,
Yeah.
And you're trying to figure out what are the underlying characteristics of the mind and how can we model those with statistics reliably. So we're obsessive about internal and external, validity, and how do you actually ascertain like the value of a construct, like, and can you differentiate that thing, that idea, that construct from other things reliably. And so that becomes very important when you're trying to figure out, is this the same or similar or different, and in what way? to something that we've seen before from an economics perspective. Behavioral economics is also a very closely related field to this.
Okay, do you think there's kind of putting that hat on for a second? Do you think there's a future where the blockchain affects the fundamental concept of an organization as we see it today? I guess what I'm asking is the way we form social structures to accomplish tasks, which is arguably an organization. Can the blockchain destroy that or modify it, or like what? Or is it just a form of an organization? Like, what are your thoughts on like organization in terms of the blockchain?
I do think that that's a great question, one that I've never heard before. And I think that's a brilliant area for research. I actually think that a decentralized culture or team or business, what would the culture look like? What would be the implications of decentralization? Psychologists have thought a lot about organizational hierarchies and the effect that has on cultures in companies. Like, is it a flat organization or is it highly verticalized? And I think that's a fascinating question, is the distributed aspect of it, because it surely will have an effect.
Yeah.
The question is what type of effect, and is that going to be consistent depending on industry or the type of problem you're solving? If it's a doing well by doing good type of project, or is it, so that's actually a very, very fascinating question that should be unpacked.
Let's unpack it.
Yeah.
Okay. We got some time, it's definitely hard to think about, but I kind of think about this in terms of like how open source works today. It's distributed. There are people who have merge rights on, different repos and those kind of things. But some really, really great software has been built with this distributed model where people think, man, it'd be really cool if I added this feature or whatever to whatever library or piece of Linux or something. And then you're able to ship this product, But I think the unfortunate drawback is typically those products don't end up being very usable, right? Which is, I think, where it starts to kind of get hazy, right? Like Linux is a great example. Wonderful, wonderful operating system. Absolutely amazing. Could not be used by my wife, probably. Maybe she can use Ubuntu or something like that, but even then, it's got some rough edges to it, right? So I tend to think that the fundamental concept of organizations can shift to something that's more distributed, but you still need some kind of hierarchy, right? Because you need somebody to make a decision. I think people always talk about, like, could Uber be distributed, for instance, right? That's always one of the canonical examples. Oh, Uber, you don't really need Uber as a central authority, yada. But you kind of do, because you need people to optimize the landing page. You need a guy that's going to sit down and optimize the way the app is structured so that when you open it up, it's usable. And when you press the button, it does what you expect it to do. And it's not just something that was merged in by a guy who maybe was drunk that night and, wasn't thinking about what was supposed to happen. Those kind of things. And it's not to say that people screw up in, merging in code, but I still think you need some kind of like structure, or do you? That's the question. Or could you feasibly do everything distributed?
I think that, having done multiple companies, I really, and someone who's extremely passionate about, crypto and the blockchain, I think that transactional models lend themselves very well to decentralization. But like you said, the actual innovation of the product, ideas are often created by a single individual, sometimes against their will. Like, my idea for Scully came to me in my sleep. There's no way to decentralize that. Sometimes innovation and sometimes great design happens over 6 or 7 whiskeys at your computer in the middle of the night at 5 a.m., and that's just when it happens. And so I know that's an extreme example, but for sure, sometimes you need maybe a small amalgamation of experts that are operating synchronously at the same place at the same time in the here and now building something. There's a magic to that. So I don't think, like, for instance, in the example of Uber that you used, the transactional aspect of Uber would be much better served to completely decentralize the transactions that are occurring between, the driver and the consumer, and maybe even automating the price surging and different things like that, and how, what's allocated to the broader company. But I mean, I think you do need some centralization around design and strategy. I just don't see those aspects of a company being completely decentralized in a way that will work for all companies.
Yeah, or even product, right? Because you have to there's limited resources. You have to determine how to use those resources to effectively serve products. So, PMs, product guys, are usually really good about determining what things need to get done in what order, right? In order to serve some kind of goal. Do we put this button on the app, or do we not? Do we put this button and the two other buttons on the app? Like, how do you make those decisions? How do you make them distributed? I don't know if you can. Like, I think you can just get into a battle, and ultimately somebody's just got to sit there and say, fuck it. Like, I think this is what it's supposed to be. If I get fired, I get fired, and whatever, or everything works out for me. So it's like, I don't know. That's kind of where I get, and I like I said, I kind of vacillate, depending on the day, between believing that blockchain is the future and kind of believing that it's something else that we don't fundamentally understand. And that's usually really the crux of it, right? It's the central part is you really kind of do need centralization for most things. Now, once the innovation's occurred and it becomes commoditized, it becomes easy. Like, could we replicate Uber on the blockchain now? Yes, because it's been built, right? But going from 0 to 1 needs a guy and a team of small people, or a girl. It needs a team of small people to think through what needs to get done in what order, right? I mean,
I couldn't agree more. And, maybe this isn't the best. Let's say this is not going to be the most commonly used example of decentralization, but government is decentralization, right?
It's true.
Let me explain why.
Yeah.
And it's because you have to funnel down to a single decision: who's going to be president. Mm-hmm. And so you do that through a democratic election process, especially if it were like a straight vote. But for the sake of simplicity, let's not get into the pros and cons of the Electoral College. But because it's decentralized doesn't make the outcome necessarily better, right? There are still ways to inject influence into a decentralized process. So it's not like it's amoral. It's not like it's unbiased. It's not just because it's decentralized. That's really almost not associated in the Venn diagram, in my opinion. Okay. And so, I think that there are a lot of benefits to decentralization, but there are also some significant drawbacks. Like, if you look at how do you basically invalidate a democratic process? Well, what if you just influence the minds of the people participating in that process?
Which just happened, right? Yeah.
Which is still happening right now.
It still happens. Yep.
Right. So, I mean, I think that you're always gonna, it's like good hackers. Like, they have all kinds of social techniques that you can leverage that have nothing to do with the technology. And so, those tools will always be at people's disposal. I mean, the ironic thing is this is supposed to be so much more secure, and everything that we're doing in crypto is the big selling point is security. Crypto literally is about security, the word.
Yeah.
So, but people are getting hacked left and right constantly. And that doesn't help uptake either, and sort of disseminating the technology. So, I think that there are definitely some serious drawbacks that need to be resolved before we're going to get to that next, sort of bull run.
So here's another question, kind of on that similar facet. And I just wrote it down because you were talking about, I guess, how really, democratic process is the original decentralization, right? So the question is tech the anti-decentralization? So is it the antithesis or the opposite of decentralization? Right? 'Cause, I mean, think about it. You have a democratic process in the United States that was effectively hacked using Facebook, and it's a massive lever where you have, maybe let's just call it a couple thousand guys somewhere in a country in Eastern Europe somewhere or whatever that are able to manipulate the minds of people who are voting to affect the outcome of the election, right? So it's like they're able to use tech as this massive lever to create something, right? So it's kind of interesting if you think about it, because that in effect means that tech can unravel this whole democratic process and almost make it useless, right? Just by nature of something like that. And if you take that, you kind of just take it a couple steps further, right? AI is, 3 or 4 steps down the road, which is the ultimate tech. And also the ultimate centralization, right? At some point, it'd be ridiculous not to just trust the AI with that. If I just produced a, generally intelligent, super intelligence right now, you'd be crazy not to trust it with your entire life and the livelihood of all your kids and family and everything. But you'd want to centralize. It'd be crazy not to, right? And if you didn't centralize, you get left behind because everybody else would be doing, So, it's an interesting thought. I mean, I'd love to kind of hear your thoughts on, is tech in this world, are we just leading towards the, an ultimate centralization step or scenario or state?
Well,
and this is kind of just like a weird little, this is another thought I have all the time is this just a wonderful kind of like, stop on the highway towards super intelligence, and in a super intelligent world, and it's all centralized. So who gives a crap, right?
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, you're one of the early innovators in AI, and I think that's an incredibly astute question, especially your use of the word ultimate, because in that sense, the ultimate tech. I mean, meaning the last tech. I mean, that's probably true. I mean, an AGI, like Nick Bostrom's book Superintelligence is a really killer primer, even though it can be a bit pedantic at times. It's an amazing book on if you've not fully grasped the implications of AGI, artificial general intelligence, where it's generally intelligence, not specifically good at OK Go games, but it's actually like can do everything you can do 20 million times better, and then it continues to get better every day. I think that those are examples where that's such a subsuming technology that it could potentially obviate the need. Why does blockchain exist? That's the question. What problem? What are we hiring blockchain to do?
Yeah, that is the question, right? I mean, I think in the short run, there's a lot of value. In the long run, there's questionable value, right? Just because of that. I mean, we don't even need, I think, general intelligence in the concept of like a conscious, intelligent machine. Like, if you just had something that could fake consciousness and do a ton of work and be smarter than the collective intelligence of humanity, you don't really need a decentralized system at that point. You can trust it for everything. Resource allocation, you can trust it with, which is really what governments, is hired for. We hire the government to allocate resources to protect us, to all of those kind of things. So I don't know. I mean, what is the purpose of blockchain in the ultimate sense? And in the short term, we can come up with some arguments for it. But 200, 300 years from now, what is the purpose of blockchain?
Yeah, it's like why does it exist? For example, distributed computing in from the perspective of the Human Genome Project was about that it would be too difficult, it would take too long to have a cadre of people, no matter how qualified, produce this knowledge. And so they had to take a distributed model and organize the work and the consolidation of the work in such a way that it could be achieved what would take thousands of years into, a handful of years. And it was one of the most incredible things that we as a humanity have ever achieved, and we're only beginning to reap the rewards from that. So that was solving a bottleneck of throughput to produce the knowledge we needed. For blockchain, what I'll say is I see online a lot talk about blockchain and decentralization as solving human flaws, like character flaws, to better utilize resources. I see that a lot. You are right that an AI might be more appropriate if you could have a pure AI that doesn't have a relationship with a nation state.
Yeah.
Or whatever is a nation state at that point in the future.
Facebook.
Yeah, exactly.
Amazon.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Then actually that might be a better solution. I don't know. I'd be really curious to hear what your thoughts are on why are people passionate about blockchain, or why does blockchain exist objectively? Like, not what does it do, but why is it created, and why are people investing in it besides getting rich?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a certain amount of that, just pure wealth creation, right? And specifically in the last few years. And I think there's a lot of, I think we know that there's something about it, and I can't even articulate it, to be honest. And I've tried to articulate it, but I can't. That is special. One thought and kind of idea that I had is that it allows you to create markets around almost anything really, really easily. So if you think about it from like a information perspective, markets are really good about just compressing information, right? So you have the price of something, right, which is it compresses information, relative to whatever the current context is. So if you have something where you can create a lot of markets, so I could have like the Jimmy coin, and it could be the Focusrite preamp coin, and the microphone coin, and all these different coins that could exist, and you can figure out ways to build software that can manage manage my usage and utilization of these different things. Then you can create a world where markets exist everywhere. So there's an aspect of that I think could be there, but I'm not super clear on like, if that would be better than, an AGI, or just even, some kind of really intelligent machine. Maybe it would, maybe it wouldn't, or maybe that kind of is what it ends up being, right? Like at that point, is it just a way of, yeah.
I mean, I still feel confused in the sense that, and I'm glad to actually walk through this exercise where I don't know the answer, because I mean that's what often happens when we talk, Jamie, is I learn a lot, and I think that in this case, I'm not hiring different blockchain applications to make markets more efficient for me. I'm happy with the price I pay on Amazon for stuff, in Uber for stuff. I'm happy with what things cost me and what I get in return. So are we hiring blockchain to make markets more efficient, or to strip inefficiency out of markets? I don't know. I mean, I'm not personally doing that. That's not why I'm in it, mm-hmm. But I do get that, they can definitely have market implications, but right now it's difficult to say. I think organized distributed computing that's incentivized, that makes sense to me. If we could apply it towards scientific endeavors, that definitely makes sense to me.
Yeah.
I would love to see more of that. And there are some companies that are exploring that, but a lot of the companies that have been created, I think we all know this, are total bullshit.
Oh my God, yeah. A lot of money raised around just things that have yet to materialize, in a year, which is amazing.
And won't
crazy.
Materialize. They're end of the runway.
Yeah.
There's no VC out there that's going to put money into a company that hasn't accrued clients and data and revenue and profit.
Especially if you raise $50 million, right?
Yeah.
That's the thing. It's like if you raise the kind of cash some of these ICOs raised, and you have nothing to show for it. I mean, plus I almost think it's borderline irresponsible if you raised, I think, God, some of these projects raised $200-300 million. That's a significant amount. That's entire funds of venture capital, right? And if you're allocating $200 million worth of assets to a project that really only takes probably 5 or 10 million to determine the feasibility of, it's irresponsible. It's like you should be. The joke I always have is, if I, raised a couple $100 million, I'd probably buy a bunch of Pizza Huts and cash flowing. It would turn into a PE fund, and then it would fund the innovation with the profits off the
Right.
cash
Exactly.
flow, right? I mean, that's what you'd want to do. Like, it'd be almost crazy to just say, well, we're going to just speculate on this little project over here and hope it works out with all of our might. So yeah.
Which is exactly why you just explained exactly what I think the rationale is going to be for PE firms when they go around looking at what's going on in crypto. They're going to say which ones are making money and being used. Yeah. They're going to buy them all, put them all together, and that's going to fund the innovation for whatever thing that they create together as a whole. I think that's exactly what's going to happen in the consolidation phase, and I think probably the only reason that it's not begun yet is because PE is not ready, or their LPs or GPs are not ready to have crypto exposure with the current state of affairs. They're waiting for things to naturally shake out or go from whatever they cost now to 1 cent or less.
Yeah. It's probably like a lot of regulatory too. I mean, last year I was trying to set up a fund, and the attorney I talked to kind of likened crypto to cannabis. He was like, it's kind of in a similar vein. It's kind of a shady but not so shady kind of area over here. Although it's becoming, I think, more mainstream now, especially with all of the regulation and the main bank adoption and those kind of things.
Well, I would say cannabis is more closely related to the Pizza Hut, not just because that's what you want to eat, but because like it's a cash cow. I mean, like
it's true.
Canada's rolling in cash now that they legalized, and it's a great source of revenue for the state. So I think
there's no revenue for crypto, right? It's your
I was talking to Matt King last night at this crypto event, and he was bringing up so many great points about cannabis and about crypto, but not together. He doesn't see these worlds as like the same thing or really related. And in often cases, when you try to merge these two things, it doesn't really make sense. Crypto is about kind of speculation and investing in new technology, and cannabis is that's some old school stuff. Like if you want to know like how to make money, look at the alcohol industry and what happened in the after prohibition with the alcohol industry and the tobacco industry. I mean, anything that's consumable that can alter your state of consciousness, that's a cash cow. What would be interesting is like, how would you spend $300 million? Like I would almost want to do a seed to sale from seed to retail or buy a bunch of companies that are already doing that, put together a little weed conglomerate and, scale that thing up and use that money to support the innovation. So I do think that's interesting, man. Like maybe these crypto companies shouldn't be pure crypto. Maybe they should have streams of revenue that are coming in that can sustain them long term. It's a tough lesson to like burn $1 million a month and run out of runway.
Yeah, it's a hard lesson. Speaking from a guy, I know. There's a lot of people who know, man. You don't want to do that. Okay, cool. So changing gears, we'll just do a little quick fire and kind of wind down a little bit here. Books. Any recommended books? Doesn't have to be crypto related. Could be anything.
I'm going to actually, because this is actually heavily on my mind, I think I'm going to reread this too, but Nick Bostrom's Superintelligence.
It's a good one.
It is absolutely amazing. It's not really a light read, but it is definitely a good read. And clearly that's going to be a big thing. And, I don't know how well that book did when it first came out. I mean, it's pretty specific. I
don't think I read it until you told me about it 2 years ago or whatever.
But it'll change the way you talk about, artificial intelligence for the rest of your life.
Do you read any blogs or anything on a regular basis?
I'm just learning how to read. It's really tough for me.
What about any kind of productivity tools or hacks or anything like that?
I love Mixmax. It basically obviates the need for a personal assistant that costs you $80,000 a year for free. And I use appear.in and I embed that into it's automatic in my Mixmax invites. So when people schedule something with me, it not only puts it on their calendar, it puts them into this like seamless video conferencing thing where they just click the link. I've had people pop up in that chat window in their boxers, not realizing how seamless that was going to be to just pop up on my screen. And they're all embarrassed because it's so seamless. It's the best. I've used it traveling all over the world. I was living in Australia, living in Thailand. Manages all the time zones for you, everything in between. It integrates with your email. It is amazing. But usually you'd have a staff of at least 1 or 2 people that are doing all the things that's totally automated. So I definitely love software as an entrepreneur to solve all those like little crappy things. I want to turn this on you. Are there any good VA stuff that doesn't require more work than it's good for to get up to speed on?
Yeah, I mean that's always the trick with virtual assistant type work. And this is something I had a previous project that I was working on that was VA based, and there was some AI stuff that we were doing. And there's this kind of hurdle that we always ran up against, which was delegation. So most people don't learn how to delegate effectively. So it's kind of hard for somebody to learn that, right? So and that's always where the problem ends up being with assistants. We sign these people up and they'd be like, okay, now I got an assistant. So what the fuck do I do with this? It's like, well, you can do anything. And it's like, it goes back to the hiring question. When people hire a product, they hire it for a specific, or the hiring, analogy you had before, they hire a product for a specific purpose. And when the purpose is too broad, it's really kind of hard for people to conceptualize. There's too much cognitive load there. Your mind just can't figure it out. So, that's something I'm actually really passionate about, is trying to figure out ways to minimize the cognitive load and make it easier on people. I envision an AI future and world where things happen as you need them to happen just by nature of you doing them. So that's a whole other conversation. But, I haven't really come across any kind of good VA product. And I mean, I've, relentlessly studied the space. I've used multiple different VAs. I used Fancy Hands for years. Still use Fancy Hands. But it's, hit and miss. Quality is horrible. And even if you outsource, like the best VA is like that assistant that costs you $80,000 usually, to be honest, that you can contextualize with and have a conversation.
They create a mental model and are able to predict what you need, which is exactly what you're hoping to get from an AI.
Yep.
Let me ask you a simple question about that. What is your number one tip for entrepreneurs like us for delegating to a VA? If you're going to do it right and the most efficient way possible, what are the best practices on delegation?
Spend the time up front. So you have to sit down and think about the tasks that you want to accomplish. And what you want to do is if it's like an offshore VA, you want to write like a playbook. So you want to write like, almost like I'm a software engineer. You want to write like scripts. And actually, I used to had a bunch of scripts that I wrote where it's like, book a meeting, and it literally has like a template in it, and it has, what you want to see in the meeting invitation and all of that stuff. And you give that to somebody. You say, every time something happens, I want you to, to do this. The other thing I would say is practice with your VAs the OODA loop. Observe, orient, decide, act. So it's just, you see, when I basically tell people, when I request something, think about what I'm asking you, tell me what I'm asking you and what you're going to do to resolve it. And then before you do it, I'll tell you should do it, basically. So absorb, orient, decide, act. It's actually something I stole from my pilot days. I got my pilot's license a few years ago. And, whenever you're talking on the radio in an airplane, it's always, you repeat what the person told you to do, and then you do it. You always repeat it, because that kind of helps you communicate more effectively. So
my dad's a pilot too, and he or flies planes. I don't know if he does so legally, but he fixes like old warbirds and stuff.
That's cool.
He uses that. He lives by that mantra. So it's really funny that you mentioned that.
I do it with my kids too. It's great.
What would be amazing is if those scripts were part of a VA platform. Like if they had like suggested scripts you could choose from a la carte that are like the most frequently used ones, and you like could click and select the ones you want, or like maybe even they're user generated. Like, you encourage people to make a script and then you can use other people's scripts. Be like, because a lot of times I bet some of your scripts, which I am going to shake you down for before I leave here, are really, really good.
Yeah. That was the part of kind of what we were doing for Vesper, like the previous project I was working on, was trying to, take some of the script concept and build some build some programmatic executions. So have the computer do some of the work, but then, have a human do the gaps that the computer couldn't do. So, and there's another company out there. I don't know if they're still around. I think it's called Invisible, that was doing this stuff as well. So, they have kind of more of a script approach where you can kind of hire your ops people to do different things. So it's cool. Man. So thanks for spending some time with us today.
It's really been a pleasure.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, hopefully we'll do it again soon.
Yeah, we'll have to get you back on in the future.
Definitely.
Cool. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.